Hey, y'all.
Hey Zach, how are you?
Good.
Good.
How are you all doing?
I'm good. Hanging in there. It's been a week. Been a long, hot week.
Yeah, yeah. It has been a bit hotter, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, man, we are down to the final few here, aren't we?
During that last module, during that last module, since we'll be working in teams, are we going to re-team again, make new teams?
Yeah, so we'll make new teams when we start the capstone for sure. We could do it earlier. Yeah, we could probably consolidate, but yeah, we'll need to make teams that will work on the capstone project together. So typically what we do is we have um, people come up with their own ideas of what they would want to work on. And then we'll have like team leads for each team, usually who came up with the idea or whoever wants to kind of lead the project, whoever feels comfortable doing that. And so we usually have like four teams or so, um, three or four projects, and you'll work on that project with your team.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Okay, let's start. Let's get to it. So we're gonna be
Quick question
walking.
before sorry, quick question
Yeah.
before we start. I came in when you're answering what I believe the question was, what's the capstone like? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Um. Yeah. So do you have a question about it, or did you?
No. I think you said you break it into four teams and break it up and then have a team lead and such. Is that correct?
Yep. And
Okay,
then
cool.
yeah, so there'll be three or four different projects. So last year, a team did like a gardening app, that would track, like you could look up plants and stuff and track what you have in your garden basically. And then there was a weight tracking app, exercise tracking app, and then there was also a recipe app. And then I think there was one more, I can't remember, but yeah, you can kind of brainstorm and think of whatever it is you'd like to work on, and then people just kind of vote on what they like the most. Okay. All right, so we're going to be going through the work that you guys did on Saturday, just making sure that we all understand what's going on there. Um, and then on Saturday, we'll start learning about databases. So far, we've been using a fake database, and so we'll start learning about how real databases work. Okay, before I jump in, any questions or anything?
I got stuck on the updating quantity of items in the cart. For some reason, I just couldn't figure out how to increment and decrement. I kept running into errors, so I got stuck there.
Okay. I'm guessing, did anybody get through most of this? Where did everybody end up?
I got to the window alert, but it still wasn't updating the increase or the decrease in the cart.
Okay.
I got stuck in the same one.
Okay, cool. All right, so what did you guys do? when you said you got stuck on the update, are you talking about on this get stuck on the quantity update or this one down here?
Oh, for me, it was the to do number 3. Like
Okay,
adding a
okay, cool.
button.
Okay.
Same.
Okay, cool. All right. And so what you just mentioned is you guys got, someone said you guys got stuck on the window alert part.
No, I was just saying that I did get that part to work.
Okay. Cool. Okay. All right. So let's start from the beginning though. So adding a menu item to the cart. We had that bug where you could duplicate it. So we're on our menu here. Yeah,
we
go ahead.
were supposed to find that bug, right?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I can go to latte and just kind of keep hitting add to cart. And if we go back and yeah, so if we go and look at our DB, we can see that the cart, Cooper, the cart has this ID in it multiple times with the same quantity of 1. So we, instead of having these duplicated like this, we want to just have one object in here with ID 1 and then with quantity, however many this is, 10 or whatever. So that's something we need to fix that on our back end. So you'll often have this sort of, when you're starting off, you have this question that you often run into of like, do I do this on the front end or do I do this on the back end? Like, should I handle this sort of functionality? Like, where should I do it? If it can be done on the back end, then typically you want to do it there. It doesn't mean that you can't do it on the front end, but you want your back end to keep things sane, and you want your back end to make sure that like nothing's going to get out of whack. And somebody can use your API directly. Like, so, you know, you've got your front end and then you got your API in your database. And if you can add if you can like duplicate an item in the database the way that we're doing it here, by hitting the API directly, that's a problem. So you don't want just the front end to handle like protective logic like that because like someone may just hit your API directly instead of just using your front end. So if you can do it on the back end, then usually you'll want to reach and do it there. So we need to go to our API and go to cart. And this is our to-do number 1. So we will basically say const existing cart items equals I mean, I guess we could actually okay. So we can do this get by ID method on the cart to see if there's an item in the cart already. So we will do, oh yeah, I told you what to do there. Okay. All right, so we use this get by ID method to see if there's an item with that ID already in the database. If that is in the database, we're going to receive that item. Like we'll receive that full object. But if it's not in there, does anybody know what this will be? This item in cart already? What value it will be if it's not already in there?
I don't. Is it null? Because it's
Close. It'll be undefined in this case. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at sort of our implementation of the DB here, we are using the find method, the find array method. And so if that method doesn't find anything, it just returns undefined. So what we can do is we can say, you know, if the item is in the cart already, so this will either be an object or it will be undefined. So if it's an object, then it'll be truthy. And so this if statement, it will run. So, you know, if the item is in the cart already, then we want to use this update by ID method, which we give, and the only thing we have in there is the ID and the quantity. So I wrote this method to just take the ID and then the new quantity, and it will set it for you. So in that case, we will do, yeah, db.cart update by ID, and then pass it the request.body ID. Since we are kind of accessing this ID twice, it might be good to do okay, and then so I'm going to say update by ID and passing it the ID from the body of the request, and I just sort of saved that to a variable because I'm going to use it twice. And then we need to give it the new quantity. So if it was in there and the quantity was, or like, what, so how should I update the quantity? So we want to just increment the quantity by 1, right? So what this will look like is just, we take if it's already in the cart, we just take that item and reference its quantity, which Copilot's telling me to do already. So since we have that item, we can see what its current quantity is. So if it's in the database and it had quantity 5, then this would be 5, and then we just add 1 to it. And then, so it'll be 6 after we save it. So yeah, plus, yeah, I think would work. It's, it only is going to work though, because we're using like a fake implementation of a DB. And so that would have worked, but normally, like when we actually start dealing with a DB, that wouldn't have exactly worked. We would need to do it more like this, where we are like calculating the new value and then saying, hey, save this new value.
Why doesn't it work with the database?
If we had done like item in cart already dot quantity plus plus.
Yes.
Yeah. So it depends on, this is gonna be a long answer. It depends on what it's typically, the code that's typically communicating with your database from your backend, like from your server, is often called like an ORM, which is sort of a term that's used that's pretty far from its original definition. But basically, like if you decided you're going to use a database, like you're going to use Postgres or you're going to use MongoDB, or whatever SQL database you're going to use. That's one decision. So you decide what database you want to use. Databases talk with all different programming languages. So if you're a JavaScript developer or a Python developer or a Java developer or whatever, you can use Postgres or you can use MongoDB. So the decision of what database you use and then like what language you use are sort of independent. Like any language can use any database typically. So when we use Node or JavaScript and we decide to use Postgres, for example, then you will also typically pick an ORM for like the thing that's going, like the code you're going to use to talk to the database. So in Node right now, popular ORMs are called like Type ORM or Sequelize, or if you use MongoDB, Mongoose, or Prisma or Drizzle. So these are all different like code projects, code like frameworks that are meant to make working with a database easier. And so the long answer to your question is like, depending on which database you decide to use and which ORM you decide to use, they will have different syntax for how to update data in the database. Typically though, it's not going to look like taking something and then doing plus plus on it, because when you're dealing with a database, you're potentially pulling in data from the database to your server code, but then to update it, you're then like sending a request to the database to update the data. And so usually you're not like directly mutating the database in your code. You're like deciding how you may want to change the data and then like sending a request to change the data to the database. So that's why plus plus typically wouldn't work, because that plus plus is like a shorthand syntax to like directly mutate a variable that's in your memory of your program, not to update data that's on a database somewhere else.
Okay, that makes sense. It did make sense.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we have a lot to learn about databases still. But yeah, whenever you're using code to go update a database, you'll typically see code that sort of looks like this. It'll have some sort of update method that then takes the new data you want to set. Okay, so we're deriving this, but all I have to say, the plus plus thing would have worked in this sort of fake example of a database. But anyways, so we calculate the new quantity and then run this update by ID method to update the item in the database. Now, if it's not already in the database, then we just need to do what we were already doing before. So we have like an else part of this branch here. So we can remove this to do item and then kind of update this logic of the code. So now our backend, when it receives a post request to add a menu item to the cart in the database, it's going to look at the item you're trying to add. So it's going to say, okay, here's the ID of the menu item. Let me look and see if that's in the database. If it is, then I'm going to just update the quantity for it. If it's not, then I'm just going to go ahead and add it. So that's how we've changed our backend. So we can go and kind of clear the cart real quick. And then add latte. So we can see ID 1, quantity 1 is in there now. And then add it again. And ID 1, quantity 2 is now in there. So that looks like it's working correctly. Okay. All right, so now we're on to our cart page, I think. There's our cart. That looks correct. So there's ID 1 is the only thing in there right now. And there's 2 of them. And our code. Sorry, I probably shouldn't do 2 windows at a time. That probably is hard for you all to see. Let me close these other ones.
Quick question about the way that your to-dos are set up. When it, plays throughout the code that you have here, did you do it to where, we'd be working right where that to-do is? Or, because like when you're talking about whether to go to the front end to fix something or do it in the back end, that was kind of not confusing me, but I was like second guessing myself, like, okay, in order to do this, something needs to change here, but also on the DB. Or does that kind of make sense what I'm asking? I don't know if I'm wording it
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I tried to put the to-dos in the spot where I thought you would need to do something. Now some of them might have required you to do something in more than just that spot. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think I was just looking a little too much into it on some of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of, in these early days here, there's like a lot of ways to do things as well. And so it's like, and you feel like, oh, maybe there's a right way to do it. There's really not. I mean, people have opinions about how to do it, but there's a lot of different ways to do things. So like, you gotta just like figure out a way to do it and see it work, and then get feedback, see what people think about it, but like you can't just like, you have to start sort of trying, you have to start sort of making a guess and just like working through it. So yeah, it's good that you struggled with that. That's normal. Okay. All right, so next next here we have remove from cart. And this is like remove entirely at this point. It's not like update the quantity. It's like remove the whole thing. So we have that function defined, and we have it attached to an on click. So there's a button that says remove from cart, and when you click that button, calls that function, and then it calls the API and tells the backend to delete the item from the cart. So when that happens right now, you click it and nothing changes, right? So the page looks the same, but it did, I think, remove that item from the database. So I'm going to go look at the database. So yeah, you can see, it did update the database and remove that item from the cart. So it's not there anymore. The page looks the same. So, I don't know how much Brian talked about this, but in React, the reason it's called React is because certain things, like the UI of the page, will change or react to data changing. So that's kind of the idea behind this framework is, you simply have to manage data in a particular way, and if you do that, then the UI will automatically update to reflect the current state of that data. And when I say manage data in a particular way, I'm talking about state most of the time. So that's why they have this whole use state concept, which is that if you just store the data of your application, so the data that dictates what the page should look like, if you store that in state, well, whenever you change that state, then we'll know to go update the page for you. We'll re-render the page and update it. So we have this state of the stuff that's in the cart that's up here. So we have this use state declaration. We start off with an empty cart. we have cart items, and then, you know, the page loads and we go ask the API for the stuff in the cart. And then when we get back the data from the API, we then update the state of the cart with this set cart items thing. So like, we're not putting, you know, cart in this like variable, we're putting it in this specific like React state variable. And so whenever we update that React state variable to have cart items in it, then the page knows to re-render and show those updates. So that's, you know, that's sort of what happens, you know, at first, whenever we loaded this page first, is there was something in the cart, it loaded that into the React state, and then the page re-rendered and showed that cart item. Then I clicked remove, right? So I removed it. We made that API call to then go change the database, but we didn't then change the state of the cart on the front end. So it's been changed on the back end, but we never then like called set cart items again to remove it, to set it to the new state of the cart, because we just didn't do it. Like we just didn't write that code, right? So like we have remove from cart, we call remove, and then we don't do anything else. So there's no state change in React for it to react to then update the page appropriately. So we have a few options here. The easiest one, though it's like not the most efficient necessarily, is to just reload the full cart. Just like reload all of it again. And we have a function that does that. We have this load data function, which makes a request to get all the cart items and then sets the cart item state. So that the easiest, though some people might say, hey, that's not efficient, like you could do this faster or whatever. They may say that, right? But it's not a big deal for us at this stage. Usually you don't want to worry about optimizing things too much until they actually become a problem and you need to optimize them. So we can get by with kind of doing it this way. So we simply just call that delete method, wait for it to respond that it's successfully deleted, and then just simply load the data again, just call load data. So we call load data here on page load, and then we also are now going to call it after we've deleted something, so that it gets the latest state of the cart and then sets that in the state, and then the page will re-render and show our new cart items. So if I refresh this page now, it's just going to be blank. There's nothing in the cart anymore. But if we go back to the root and add a latte, 2 lattes, 3 lattes, a long black, an espresso, a cappuccino, and a macchiato, and then go to our cart, we'll see, you know, on page load, it loaded all that stuff, showed it in the cart. And then now when I hit remove on one of these, it didn't work. Oh wait, what did it do? Yeah, it's not working. Okay, so I didn't save. Okay. All right, so we'll go back and we'll add all that stuff to the cart. And then go to cart. Still not working. So let's see what is going on in our console. So cart item is removed, but then I'm not seeing a subsequent call to get the cart again. So what happened here?
Is that a wait before the load data? Is that kind of work in a similar way to above where it says use effect, or is that totally different?
We don't have to have that await there.
Okay.
We would only need it if we were, so we need it here, because so deleting it, we're going to make the request and then it's going to come back with an answer. And so that's a promise. It's an asynchronous thing because we don't know how long it's going to take. And so we have to, it's asynchronous code. So we need to wait for that to successfully happen, like for it to actually delete the item before we load the data again, because we want
Okay.
to wait till it's deleted to then load. So this await, that's important because we want to make sure we get the response back. But then we can just load the data. Now, if we were doing something after that here that depended on the data for some reason, then we would need to await the load data call. But in this case, that's the last thing that's happening, and so we don't need to. I had that there just out of habit, but we don't actually need it. With the code so far. Okay, so I'm trying to debug this. It's not working. So we're removing stuff from the cart, and then we're calling load data, but it doesn't seem to be actually loading it. So I'm going to add a console log to load data to see that that's successfully running. I'm going to add a log to log the data again, just to see what data is coming back. So we'll try this again. All right, so we can go here and look at our console. What the heck? Oh, I don't think this thing is like refreshing the way I expect it to be. Okay. I guess my page didn't refresh for some reason. Okay, here's item 1. And yeah, it seems like it's working now. So I clicked remove, that item got removed from the list. Here's item 8. Yeah, removed it. Item 10, remove. Item 3, remove. So yeah, looks like it's working now. I'm not sure why my page isn't refreshing the way I expect it to be. Okay. All right, so that looks like it's working now. So what's happening is, if you look at the network traffic, I say, hey, remove item 5. So if you look at the network down here, remove item 5. So we see this API call to remove item 5. So, localhost 3000 API cart 5 delete. And then the response was cart item removed. So that happened successfully. Once that finished, we then made a request for the latest cart. And so it just sends back the array of all the stuff in the cart, which is these 3 things. We set the state to have those 3 things only. So then the page re-renders, and that then now just has these 3 items on the page instead of all the 4 that we had before. I can do the same thing for item 10. So you can see 10 removed, and then we refresh the cart again. Now there's just those 2 items, just these 2 items on the page. Okay, the last thing I think was to give an alert for that. So normally you wouldn't do a window alert. It's sort of like a no-no. The only time you should use window alert is if someone's like got unsaved changes and they're like navigating away. You'll see that sometimes, like, hey, are you sure you want to leave? That's okay. But for this, I think in an ideal world, you would just simply give like a toast or like a notification alert that just says, successfully remove that item. But I still want you guys to see that behavior. So without dealing with all the UI that would, that's required to build that alert, because we're focusing on backend stuff. So that's why I said use window.alert. So after the load data, now the await does matter. So now we can say, hey, delete the item, load the data, wait for that to finish. And then after that, alert, item with ID, ID removed from cart. So now I can click to do this. Notice something pretty cool here is, remember, alert like runs and like blocks the rest of the code from running. So like nothing is happening on the page because this alert thing is running. So notice you can see it's saying, hey, item with ID 3 was removed from the cart. You can still see it on the page, but you can see that we did successfully run the delete method on item ID 3 and then also refresh the cart. You can see those API calls down here. But what happens is, so that all happened, but then React is not able to re-render the page. It's being blocked by the alert. So that's why you can still see that on the page, because React hasn't had a chance to re-render quite yet. So I hit OK and then it will go away. Okay. So it sounds like you guys are able to do that okay. And now the issue, or everyone kind of got stuck on this next part. So now we want to be able to update the quantity of an item in the cart. Want to add an increment and a decrement button. Okay. So let's go to here, and we're just going to add above our delete button or our remove button. We'll add an increment, and we'll just start with increment for now. So we got a few options here. We get to design the API, right? So we have to decide how we want to handle this. We could just simply have a backend method that's, update cart item or whatever. Because right now, if we look at our API for cart, we can get the cart, we can add an item to the cart. And we can delete an item from the cart, but we don't have any way to update it. I mean, we could, if we're trying to increment it, we could call the add item to cart method, right? And it would increment it. So we could do that. But we wouldn't be able to use that method to decrease the quantity. So we have a few options. So we can add a new endpoint that's just called like update quantity, and you can accept whatever quantity you want that we would pass it. Or we could make an increment quantity endpoint or decrement quantity endpoint if we wanted to. It's sort of up to us, and there's like potentially trade-offs between both. For our purposes, I think just having one endpoint that allows you to update the quantity is probably fine, because that we may decide like to not just have the increment and decrement button to have like a quantity drop down where they would go from 2 to 10, right? And then we wouldn't want to call the endpoint like 8 times in a row. We would want to just give the new value. So I think just being able to set it makes sense. So we need to add that here on the cart ID endpoint. So what verb is this going to be? What request method type to update it?
Post.
Put. So we'll do an else if here. Yep. request method is put. So we still have our else for, well, now this message is not correct anymore, right? So we only support delete and put requests. We're working on this to do, so I'll delete it. So if it's a put, then we will kind of copy some of this code up here. So we need to grab the ID and the number ID thing here. Because remember, it comes in as a string, so we need to convert it to a number because it's in the, like when it's in the URL, it's a string, but when it's in the body, it'll be it can be a number. So you just got to know like where from the request it's coming from. So since it's in the URL, since it's in the request.query.id, then it's a string and we need to convert it. So that's what's happening here. And then we can call, so let's look at our DB. So we have this update by ID method with the new quantity. So we can just use that. We can reuse this one, this sort of DB method in this endpoint. So what we'll do, we'll call db.cart.update by ID. We're going to update it with the number ID, and then we're going to expect them to pass the quantity in the body. So the payload for the request will just be the new quantity. You can also, by the way, like we could have put the ID in the payload and then not use the query part of the thing, but it's just kind of up to you how you want to do it. But yeah, we'll expect them to pass the new quantity in the body of the request. So that's that. And then we'll say response dot status message cart item updated. Most of the time, it's pretty helpful to return the actual item. So we can have like message cart item updated, and then also our DB is not returning that. Usually it would, so I'm going to update it to do that. So we'll return found item. And so now this update by ID will return the updated item for us. So I can say const updated cart item equals db.cart.update by ID, and then cart item updated, and then we can send back this updated cart item. I'm not going to do anything with that, but that's just, you'll typically when you are using an API and you like update a piece of data, it'll respond with, okay, here's the latest data then for you. Here it is. Okay, so that looks good. And now we need to go to our front end, and we don't want to remove from cart, we want to increment. So we'll make a new function. So we'll call this and this again, I can make an increment cart item function and decrement cart item function, or I can just make an update cart item function as well. So a similar decision that we made on the back end, I'm going to make on the front end here. So I'm going to do update cart item, which will take the ID, and we also need to take the new quantity. Okay, so what do you want the quantity to be for the cart for the item. And we will do a fetch to API/cart/ID. That's true, but the method is going to be put. And then you should have seen where elsewhere we did a post method. Syntax is basically the same. So you could have copied from this page here to see how to send data. So I will do that. So our update cart item is going to be method put, and then we need to follow this sort of syntax here where we say, yeah, so that'll be the correct body. So in the body, we just need the new quantity, and then we also need, we may not have to have this, but it's good practice to do these headers, content type JSON. Okay. So update cart item takes the ID to update and the quantity. We do our fetch with a put method and pass the new quantity. So, you know, if I pull up our backend code by the side by side here, our put needs the ID in the query, and then it needs in the body of the request the quantity. Okay. So you can see here, we've got the ID in the query. And then we've got in the body, we've got this object that has the quantity in it. I'm not sure if I've talked to you guys about this shorthand syntax here, but like I have an object here and I'm making a key called quantity with the value of whatever the, like, because I have a variable called quantity up here that's going to have some value in it, I can make an object that has that property with the value of that. So normally you would see like, hey, I want to make a key that's quantity and the value of it's going to be that parameter quantity. But I want the property to just be quantity. So I'm doing this. So I'm making an object that's got key quantity with the value of the quantity parameter. But since it's the same name here, there's just shorthand syntax to just do it like this. Okay. So we make this request. We wait for it to finish. And then since we're updating the data, we can just call load data again to refresh the page. And we don't need to do an alert in this case. So I've got this update cart item function. And for increment, I just need to call update cart item.id, and then I know what the quantity is here. I have it, item.quantity, I'm displaying it, right? And I'm using the increment button. And so I simply just need to do item.quantity +1. So that will pass the new quantity that I want and the ID of the thing I want to update, and then update it. All right, and then you can see we've got ID2 with 1, and then we can increment that. Now I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so you can, I'm sure that you could figure out how to remove from cart by following that. Let's see, what else do we want to do? Okay, I don't think we're gonna have time to get to that one, so I'll send that to you guys to reference. But I want to talk about a few things that typically you'll have to think about when you're making a website. So, sorry, let me grab some water real quick. Okay, so the way we have this right now I can kind of just like really quickly click this button. But it seems fine in this case because everything's happening very quickly. But normally the internet is not, that fast because it's actually communicating for over a distance. So we can like slow down our internet and kind of see that if we do that, I can just smash this button. And it's not actually like incrementing the way that it was before because there's all these like pending network requests that are still happening. So now that I've kind of artificially slowed down the network from this tab here, you can see it's not working the same way as it was before. Doesn't even, yeah, see how long it took to update from 36 or from 35 to 36, and then now it's taking a while to go to 37. So, you got to kind of think when you're programming like what you want to be able to happen from the page. So normally what you'll see is when you kick off some sort of action, you'll see like you'll see loading indicators, and typically also like be disabled from doing anything that doesn't make sense. So, when I'm clicking increment and that's loading, it doesn't make sense for me to be able to interact with this thing at all anymore, really. Like it doesn't make sense to be able to remove it. I mean, I guess it could, but probably not. So most of the time you'll see people disable the button after you clicked it. So, and the most common thing nowadays is you'll see like loading buttons. So you have like, a big button like submit order or whatever. You click it, it changes color, it becomes disabled. There's like a little loading spinner in it. The network request succeeds, it gets it back. Then, maybe there's like a check mark and it changes to a different color. Then it like transitions to another page. So that's typically the kind of stuff that you're seeing when you're interacting with a page that's then interacting with an API. So it's good to know kind of how to program those things. So that all is kind of typically done through state in React. And so we have this update cart item method that runs whenever we click update cart. So whenever we click it, we can set the state of our application to say that it's updating the cart. And then when it's done updating the cart, we can change the state to say it's not updating the cart anymore. So what that looks like is we'll make a variable called actually this one's a little more complicated than because we need to know exactly which one's loading. Fun. Okay, so let's say, for example, we wanted to just show a loading. Let's just start with the simpler example, and then I'll do the more complicated one. So let's just say we wanted to show a loading spinner whenever the whole cart is refreshing. So we can say, we can have a variable that is, const cart loading, set cart loading. And I'm using React state because I want my app to change based off of this state changing. So I've got cart loading, set cart loading, and by default, it'll start false. And whenever we run this function load data, which is for loading data from the cart, we will say, hey, let's set cart loading to true. So we are trying to load the cart. We fetch the cart, we get the data from that, then we set the cart items, and then we are done loading it. And so we can set cart loading to false. Okay. So we've sort of set this up so that whenever we're making a request to update the cart, we have this state variable now that will tell us that we're doing that. And so, down here, you know, we have this thing that's rendering our cart items, but we could say, cart loading. So that's the variable, cart loading. So is the cart loading? Then we'll just do, normally you would do like a loading spinner or something like that, but for now we'll just say loading. And then if it's not loading, then we can show the cart. Jack this. It's so hard to get this right sometimes. Oh, okay. Oof, sorry, sometimes the syntax is tough on these things. And normally you'd want to probably break this into a new component at this point to make it a little cleaner. But what I'm trying to do here is, you know, when we're loading the cart, I'm going to show that it's loading. And then once it's done loading, then we'll show the cart. So now when my network is still low. Okay, so the network is still pretty slow. So I click increment. That is making the request to increment it, which then comes back and is successful. And then once that's successful, we then reload it, and then that shows the loading state and then re-renders it. So I can still click this increment button while it's doing the request to increment it. But then once that request is finished, then we're showing that loading state. So that's the simple starting point is, hey, let's just have this cart loading state. But imagine that we've got, a bunch of items in our cart, and we're on the cart page, and you know, we click remove, and then where did my decrement and increment go? What is with this thing? It's like not loading correctly. So I can hit increment and then increment and then increment. And so we need to think about how we want to handle this as well. So we may want to, and we may not be able to do exactly what we want, but you know, if I click increments here, it may make sense to disable all buttons at that point while we're updating the cart. Or it might make sense to only update this button. So if I click increment, Also, that loading flash is terrible. We'd probably want to change that too. To just have like a overlay loading kind of thing. But yeah, I may want to be able to click increment and then click one of these other increments. So it may make sense to just disable just the card for the cart item that you clicked on and allow you to still interact with the other ones. Or it may make sense to disable everything. So you just gotta kind of decide. So to do this implementation, we might have something like cart. So we might have, well, yeah, I'm not gonna, sorry, we're already over time. So what I was thinking about doing is basically having an array in state that has the IDs of the cart items that are updating. So then that we could disable the buttons, the increment button or the delete button, just for the IDs that are loading. But we're kind of out of time, so I'm not gonna do that. So what I'll do is I'll just look at this cart loading, or I'll just basically duplicate this cart loading state to have cart item loading, and then set this when we run update cart item. So I'll do set cart item loading to true, and then to false when it's done. And then with that, I can say, hey, if any of the items are being update, like if any of them are being incremented, disable this button on all of them is what this will do. So we can use just the disabled state of the button. So the button has just a disabled property that we can set to true to make it disabled. And so we say, hey, this button's disabled if cart item is loading. So we go back here and slow it down. We can see when I clicked it, all the increment buttons disabled, and then it loaded. So they all disable whenever I click that. So yeah, that's, so you can, you know, whenever you're doing certain actions, you can change the state by, you know, by just setting new variables, and then use them in any way to sort of disable or change the state of different UI properties appropriately to make sure that the user doesn't do anything they shouldn't be doing while you're interacting with the API. Okay, I know we're over. I'm sorry about that. Any questions or anything?
No, that helped a lot. Thank you for clearing up a bunch of stuff today.
Yeah, we didn't get through all of it, so I will send tomorrow everything finished up so that you can look at it. And then Saturday, we will start learning about real databases.
Beans. Thank you so much, Zach.
Thank
Of
you.
course. Thank you guys. Have
Thank
a
you.
happy 4th.
Yeah.
Happy 4th.
Zach, I have
Yeah.
a question before you leave.
Yeah.
Let's say that I want to go to like one of the OK Coders projects. Is there an easier way to copy it, or do I just fork it from the repo?
There's, you want to fork the OK Coders curriculum project?
Yes, if I want to like get the folders and like the APIs and all that in there, do I just fork it? Is that the easiest way to do it?
You can also just like, what you could do is, probably the easiest thing to do is if you like cloned it to your computer, and then just whenever I make changes, you can pull those changes. And then in a separate folder that you have, you can just copy over what you want to it, so that then you can like make changes in your folder. Because if you fork it or you clone it and then make changes directly to it, then it's going to be really hard to pull down my changes to it, because you'll get a bunch of like conflicts and stuff. So I would just clone the OK Coders curriculum folder to your machine, and then just copy over whatever you need.
Okay, yeah, that sounds a lot easier. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Not at the moment.
All right.
That's but
See you Saturday.
see you
See you
Saturday.
Saturday. Bye.